In this lesson, we will explore the Polish art called Wycinanki. Wycinanki, or paper cutouts, originated in the 1800s in Poland, a country in Europe. Traditionally, Wycinanki were made with large scissors made by smiths, initially designed for sheep shearing. It's difficult to imagine how one managed to use those to produce a highly detailed piece of art. Wycinanki can take on various shapes, such as stars, circles, trees, and different types of animals. But shape isn't all. The vast majority of Polish Wycinanki are very colorful. To create a fancy Wycinanki, people use various colored paper. This is also the main reason why this type of decoration wasn't widely spread when it first began. Colored paper wasn't available, so traditional colors that were used for the earliest examples of Wycinanki were reds, greens, yellows, blues, as well as golds. But now we can see them and they're extremely colorful. Completed Wycinanki were hung in windows, on walls, and from ceiling joists. Nowadays, they're often found as decorations in heritage parks, museums, and cultural centers. But these amazing forms of art are now well known around the world. Not only can Wycinanki be noticed for their colors as well as intricate cutting shapes and patterns, but one could also notice that there are aspects of symmetry, meaning same on both sides, in many examples of work. Now that we've learned some interesting facts about Wycinanki, let's use symmetry in order to create our own paper cutout Wycinanki work of art. Alrighty, in this lesson, we're going to be creating our own Wycinanki, a Polish paper cutting art. We're going to be creating a tree for this project, and as we can see, this tree has symmetry, meaning it looks the same on both sides. We're going to go through all the materials that we're going to need for this lesson and the steps to help us be successful in this lesson. So I'm going to move this example out of the way. I have a set of hole punchers. You do not need a hole puncher, but it's really exciting to use to add these little dotted details. But again, you don't need this material. So we have a hole puncher, a pair of scissors, a pencil, a white piece of paper, of course, for our tree, and a black piece of paper, of course, for our background, the space that is behind the tree. We're not going to do really anything with this black piece of paper, so we can just move it right out of the way. And we're going to focus on our white piece of paper. So when we look at this example, we can see that this tree has symmetry. So what we're going to do first is we're going to fold our piece of paper in half. See how it's standing the tall way? I'm not folding it this way. I'm having it stand the tall way. And I am just gently bringing one side over, and I'm going to try my best to line up both sides of my paper, and I'm just going to give it a nice crease. Now we can see that I have a nice fold in my paper. We're going to keep this paper folded, okay? So for this whole rest of the steps in this project, we're gonna keep this paper folded. We're gonna focus on the crease. So as you can see, the crease of my paper is over here, okay? So we're gonna be doing a lot of our work on the crease. What we are going to do is we are going to create half of a tree. The reason why I am going to be drawing half of a tree is because when I cut it out, we are going to have symmetry. It's going to look the same on both sides because my paper is folded in half. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from the top. There's my first line, and I notice that a tree kind of feathers out, so there's my top. I do not want to make my line go all the way to here, because if I cut this, my tree is gonna fall apart. So we wanna make sure there's space here, right? Now I'm gonna go to my next level of my tree. Perfect. And I'm gonna make sure I stop right there, because just like I said before, if I made my line all the way here and cut it out, we would have a big problem. Our tree would be in half. So now I'm gonna do my next feathering. Oh, beautiful, nice. So there is the kind of like needle part of my tree, okay? So this one you can see I kind of did a little bit of extra detail in the ends. You can get more creative if you'd like, but I kind of wanted to focus on it being very simple. Now I'm just gonna add a trunk in, so I'm just gonna do a straight line down. Nice and easy. We can see that this looks like a tree. Now I'm just gonna do the ground. So here I go. Done. All right. So I just did a simple half of a tree, half of a trunk, and half of the ground that it is sitting on. Now what might make this a bit easier for you is if you create a template for yourself or a tracer. So what I might do is I could draw a tree on this piece of paper. And I could cut it out and trace it. So maybe you want to create a tracer for yourself. That might make this a bit easier to do this project. Some of us can really nicely draw a tree kind of free-handed, but if you want to create a tracer for yourself, that might make it a bit easier. Again, you do not have to do this step, but this might be helpful to you. So, the first version I did freehand, which means I just drew it. Didn't have an exact template really for it. I just drew my tree, right? So if I was to do this again, but use the tracer, what I'd do is I'd fold my paper in half, and again, this version might be easier for you. Put my tracer down right on the crease, see that? And then I just trace. This might be a helpful way to do it as well for you if you want to make many of these trees. And there we go. So we did the same exact thing, just in 2 different ways. Pretty cool, right? So this one was done with my tracer, this one was done freehand. So those are just 2 different ways that you can create your Wycinanki. So now we finished our tracing. Our next step is going to be cutting. So when I cut, I'm just gonna use my traced one. I'm gonna move this one out of the way. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut right on the line. I'm gonna follow this line of my tree, and that's what I'm going to cut. So here I go. So I'm going to cut right on the line. Now I want to do a really nice job. I'm staying right on that line of my paper. I am not cutting the crease. There we go. So I'm going to take these scraps and I'm just going to move them out of the way. Now, we talked about symmetry in the beginning, looking the same on both sides. When I open up the half of my tree, now I have a full tree. That is pretty neat, right? So we can even see when we take our black piece of paper, this is kind of starting to look like our Wycinanki. But the difference is I have more details. I have my hole punches and I have these sweet little shapes in the inside. So I'm going to show us how we're going to get these sweet little shapes on the inside of our tree. What you're going to do is you're actually going to fold your tree right back the way it was. Because again, we're focusing on the same on both sides. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut shapes out of the middle. So here I go. So I don't know if I'm going to draw these in. You can draw them in if you want, but I think I'm just going to go free-handed. So I did a half of a heart. And when I open it up, I have a full heart. Pretty cool. So I'm going to keep it folded and keep going. The best way to do these is to do quite a few of them. It takes a little bit of practice. I'm kind of focusing on making these interesting organic shapes, kind of like the ones that we focused on when we were creating our Henry Matisse inspired paper cutout. So think about those organic shapes that we learned about. And you're going to add some kind of interesting stuff to the middle. Now, as you can see, I'm not cutting all the way to the outside of my tree. We want to keep our tree as a tree. We don't want it to fall apart. I'm going to do one last kind of tall, skinny heart at the top. Move my scraps out of the way. And now I have this really, really cool tree. It's looking awesome. So now what I'm going to do, and again, if you do not have a hole punch, that is okay. You don't need one, but it does add some really, really cool stuff to your picture. Now, if you have scissors that kind of cut with an edge, so sometimes scissors can have, special scissors have like a wavy line, maybe you want to experiment with those. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep my tree closed, and I am going to just start carefully punching holes. When I use a hole puncher, I am just pushing straight down. I am not pulling. If you pull, you might rip your paper. So please be sure if you are using a hole punch, again, you do not have to use a hole punch, but if you use a hole punch, make sure that you are being very careful with it and you aren't pulling your paper while you're creating your punches. I am keeping my tree closed this entire time. I am not opening up my tree. Maybe I want to go from this side. I'm kind of also focusing on a very specific design. I'm not just punching holes all over the place. I want to make it look interesting. So there we go. I'm going to do one more here. And again, it's really exciting to think, oh my goodness, I wonder what my tree is looking like. But just keep it closed, because it's easy to get going with the hole puncher cutting when your tree is fully open. You're not going to get that symmetry if your tree isn't folded. So I'm making sure to keep my tree folded. Here we go. Ooh, I'm doing lots of hole punches. I think this looks pretty cool. There we go. And I'm going to do an edge here. Whew, that looks good. And I think I'm going to do some down the middle of this trunk. And I think I'm going to do just a couple right here. And now, when I open my tree up, I have a very, very cool Wycinanki. Your last step is going to be to glue down your Wycinanki to your black piece of paper, which I'm going to show you very, very carefully. All right, so our very last step of our Wycinanki is going to be to glue it down. Make sure that you have a surface to glue on. That means just a scrap piece of paper, or if you have a mat at home that you can use, make sure you're not gluing on the table. I have this extra scrap that I actually am using from the tracer. So I created my tracer, and now I have this scrap that I'm going to use for gluing. I'm going to take my Wycinanki and flip it over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to carefully add glue, okay? I am not swirling my glue stick around. I'm just kind of carefully adding little parts of glue onto this. It makes it a little bit tricky because this is a big shape, and if you use hole punches, it's a little bit hard to get glue in all of the spaces because we have those hole punches. So I'm just carefully going around with my glue stick, and I'm kind of moving my Wycinanki around on this little piece of paper so I don't get any of it on the table. I'm just being very, very careful. All the way around, and again, I'm hopping with my glue stick. And I'm just kind of working my way around. My other hand, my left hand, this one, is holding my paper so it doesn't kind of like fly away as I add the glue. Make sure you're careful because sometimes this can pull away with the glue. You don't want it to rip. So here I go. This is the last edge. I'm going to take my Wycinanki. I am going to put it down on my black piece of paper. I'm going to line it up with the bottom. See how I did that? I just lined it up with the bottom. There I go. And I'm just going to kind of gently push it down. This is like the hardest part. And I'm going to give it a flip and a push. When you flip over your art piece, you're going to have that nice flat table to help push it down. So I'm just pushing on the back. And look at how cool that is. You might have some spots that need a little extra glue. Here did not glue down enough for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a little bit of glue and give it a push. And there is my fabulous Wycinanki piece. You can add shapes to the background if you want. So I had some extra scraps from the middle. Maybe you want to add those to the background. Maybe you have hole punches. You want to create snow for the background. You could create so many of these. You don't even have to do a tree. You could try something completely different. But just experiment with having your paper folded and working with symmetry, and you can create some pretty neat stuff. I can't wait to see what you come up with.